Turn camera.
Marked.
102, take one.
With overlap, action please. Action Orson, please.
Just do anything?
No, sorry, cut.
Yeah, rolling.
102, take two.
The French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. There is a California champagne by Paul Masson, inspired by that same French excellence. It's fermented in the bottle, and like the best French champagne, it's vintage dated. So Paul Masson.
102, take three.
Action please.
The French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. There is a California champagne by Paul Masson, inspired by that same French excellence. It's fermented in the bottle, and like the best French champagne, it's vintage dated. So Paul Masson.
Welcome to Flyby Films. Once or twice a month, using the magic of distance-defying tubes or some stupid shit like that, we get together to discuss films that either have been or will be forgotten. I'm Blake Collier, and with me across the universe is my friend and co-host Jameson Barsotti. Sorry, Barsotti. I did it again. Man, it's been a while since I've done that.
I think it's the first episode you screwed it up.
Yeah, the first episode. I haven't done it since then.
I scolded you, and then
yeah. Well, you can scold me again.
You get one in every 4 years, so...
Okay, that works. Yeah. On this episode, we are going to be talking about some early films with our special guest, filmmaker Brian Rose. Brian, how are you doing, sir?
Well, I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to be talking about 1942 Magnificent Ambersons, or is it 44?
I think it's 1942.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And talking about your journey with that film. We're going to get into like the process that you've gone through in the past, I'm guessing, few years. And then we're going to talk about a 1933 film that you chose called Gabriel Over the White House. And I think this is going to be a fun episode for our listeners. Brian, thank you for joining us. And do you mind kind of giving us a rundown of who you are, where you come from, and then tell us a little bit about Magnificent Ambersons.
Well, I'm a filmmaker by profession. Studied history as an undergrad originally, so I kind of
you and me both
came at it as a researcher. Got into this profession doing a lot of nonfiction type films, though I also do narrative as well. And I've been doing it for about 20 years now.
That's awesome. So you've kind of been in the news a little bit in the last year or so concerning Magnificent Ambersons, which is the second feature by Orson Welles. Where did that start? So you basically kind of endeavored on recreating the famed original cut of the film, the way Orson Welles wanted it to be, before the studio kind of did a hatchet job on it. Where did this idea come from, and kind of give us a kind of an origin story for how this project came to be?
Well, there's there are a number of answers I can give to that. I'd been aware of the film ever since I was at school, grad school, when I attended a seminar where we watched all of the films of Orson Welles, and we watched Ambersons over the course of 2 nights, if memory serves, where one night we watched the theatrical release version, and another night we watched a reconstruction that a professor named Roger Ryan had created. And his reconstruction used surviving photographs, a copy of the script, storyboard drawings to kind of fill in some of the plot that had been removed, to kind of bring it up to, I think it was about a 2-hour version. And it was, certainly a really stark contrast, between the two, and something that stuck with me for quite a long time. Then fast forward a number of years, and I guess to get kind of serious, for a moment, like I had just completed another film project, which had been about 6 years of research and investigation. It was a documentary about a missing persons case. So it was, pretty heavy stuff. And it was a film that meant a great deal to me. But then when, I tried to get it out there, it just, had no luck whatsoever. Couldn't really get it programmed into festivals, couldn't get it distributed or critics to review it. And, I'd spent all of my money to make it and was kind of left in a place where, I just like, why am I doing this? Was kind of the thought I had. And just sort of had a kind of like a moment where I realized that I needed to just get back to why I got into this profession to begin with, which is because I love making films and, just said like, forget festivals and critics and, screenings and all that stuff. I'm going to make something that I want to make. And so I kind of went to, within the field of jazz, there's a term called going to the woodshed, which is basically where you would literally go back out in the woodshed and you just practice your saxophone like Charlie Parker,
That's awesome.
did. And you don't worry about anybody seeing your work. It's purely for your own edification. And that was kind of where I then got into this Ambersons project, really because it was something that it wouldn't require a lot of capital up front. It just required a lot of research, which I'm good at.
Mm-hmm.
All the materials that survive relating to the film are publicly available at basically 3 major archives. And it's basically just kind of just set myself up with a drawing tablet and just kind of started working on it. And, didn't really think it would be a very big project. Thought it'd just be sort of a little thing. Like, I thought I would kind of jump off from Roger Ryan's work and thought maybe I could do a little bit more. Maybe there have been some new things discovered. Maybe I can like take advantage of some of the newer technology and go a little bit further in terms of recreating it. And then what happened was we had the pandemic, and suddenly I had a lot of time. We all had a lot of time.
We did.
And so I really think of this film as kind of my pandemic project that just turned into me spending several years, um, recreating the film sets in 3D and then hand animating characters. And it just became more and more complex until, the end results that I have now, and that is now evolving even further.
Yeah,
So that's the long short of it.
That's a wild story. Yeah, I didn't have any this is sad for someone who likes film, but I have seen, this is the first Orson Welles movie I'd seen. And I watched specifically your cut with the illustrations, the hand-drawn illustrations. And I watched the end, the last probably 10, 15 minutes of the theatrical cut just to see the significant shift in ending. And I mean, I get it. I get why Wells is so important as a filmmaker. It's a pretty powerful piece of work. I guess, how did you get the attention of kind of the powers that be that wanted to take it a little bit further even than what you were taking it?
It's Fable Studios, right?
Fable Studios, yeah.
Yeah. I just Edward Saatchi with Fable Studios reached out to me, and he had heard about the work I'd been doing, and we got to having a conversation, and sent him a copy of the film, and he told me about kind of what he was hoping to do. And this was always something that I thought really had hope that I hoped would come about, because um, my work built upon the work that Roger Ryan did, and Roger Ryan's work built upon another scholar named Carringer, who wrote a fantastic book, which was really the first scholarly work on the film. So it's just as a progression. And my hope was that, yeah, maybe in like another 20 years, somebody else will come along and do something even more advanced. And what I wasn't counting on was that it wasn't going to take 20 years. Literally, the technology is here now.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear it in that kind of progression sense, because when you were talking about how you watched it like over 2 nights, that was my experience. Like I had never seen Magnificent Ambersons before until we were watching it for this podcast, and so I watched the theatrical version, and then I watched the hand drawn one that you made. So it was kind of interesting to watch that, um, and to kind of like right off of what you're talking about. So you're talking about, you know, using AI to kind of, I guess, extrapolate these animations even more and further.
Mhm. Yeah, it's it gets really convoluted to kind of to explain. So I'll try to do my best, because AI, it's a term that is very fraught, and it's very loaded with a lot of implications. It seems like every day AI is in the news, and
Hmm.
it's kind of it's a scary technology. It's new technology. It's has a lot of promise, and people don't quite know what to make of it. And there are different kinds of AI, and I think one thing that that initially had some people concerned, starting off with this, is when they saw AI, they thought of, oh, is this generative AI? Are you just going to be telling chat gpt to do this and that, and are we going to see these characters with 6 fingers
Hmm.
walking around? And it's really has more in common with the kind of work that's done on films like Avatar and Lord of the Rings.
I was
um,
I was wondering if there's a similarity to what you guys are doing and like rotoscope, which has been around
mhm,
for a long time, because in the article you sent over, um, there was this talk about hiring actors to kind of play out
yeah,
these scenes, and then kind of like building building out things using kind of generative technologies, but with a watchful eye.
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. My work is essentially being used as the reference point. The way Edward put it when we first got to talking was, he said that this had been a dream of his to do this, do a reconstruction using this technology, but the biggest hurdle was all the research. He said this was going to take us years to figure out all this stuff to see if this was even possible. And he saw my work and he says, you've solved that problem. You've already done all of the upfront work. Um, so yeah, so it's kind of like this guide now for, yeah, we'll basically be having actors on sound stages, filming them bodily, filming faces, recording voices. So there's actually going to be a lot of actors, a lot of people involved, and really AI factors in more for recreating sets and backgrounds, and then for using machine learning to recreate voices and the faces and the costumes of these characters, to then skin the actors just like you would Andy Serkis when he portrayed Gollum,
Mhm.
or any of the actors who work in the Avatar films. That's really why I say it really has a lot more in common with motion capture and rotoscope animation than straight up generative AI.
Which is just from the little bit of research I've done around this movie outside of the article you sent us. Like it feels like the significant fear around this is specifically a lack of understanding of what's actually going on. Because if you take a, I feel like the issue of bringing back dead actors to
Mhm.
movies now is a hot topic for a lot of
Mhm.
reasons. Um, but really, what is going on here, from the sounds of it, is that you're basically doing what Avatar did or what Lord of the Rings did by skinning the actors that are already doing the work.
Yeah.
Um, and that seems a lot less, I don't know, problematic. If you voice it in those terms, it's almost like, no, we're just following the trajectory of the film business as is. We're not doing anything different. Do you think that there's, just because the terminology of AI was brought up within this project, do you think that's the main reason why there's this fear around this project, or the controversy around this project?
Well, I think the controversy comes from a very well-meaning place,
Mhm.
which is, people ask, well, how can you possibly assume or know what Orson Welles had in mind? How can you recreate a film that is lost? And a lot of people, they don't realize just how well documented this film is. I would compare it to reconstructing a lost painting. Let's say you have a mural of the Last Supper, painted by an old master, and it's been damaged, and all you have are maybe Jesus and four of the 12 disciples. Um, so as like, if you were an art restorer, well, what you would do is you would look at the surviving archives relating to that artist. You'd see, did that artist have preparatory drawings? Are there contemporaneous letters where he describes what the painting is going to look like? There are traditions within the portrayal of the Last Supper that you can also go by in terms of how everyone is placed, and then you would look at, like, did that artist have students? Did he have a school where people would have studied his work and perhaps made copies? And so the work is lost, but then there's all kinds of pieces and things that you can then use to try to understand what the original looked like. And that's the case with The Magnificent Ambersons. It's an extraordinarily well documented film. There are, of course, photographs, just dozens of photographs that were taken on set. You have the original book that the movie's based upon, which is very useful for gleaning particular contextual details to some of the missing scenes. You have drafts of the screenplay. You then also have what's called a cutting continuity script, which is something is kind of a foreign concept to today, but it was very commonplace in the pre-digital, pre-tape era of filmmaking, when you didn't want to have to just start pulling reels of film and putting them on the projector and scrubbing through to find the scene you wanted. What you did was you pulled the cutting continuity script, which would be made at the end of a film's production, and it would record every shot in the final edited film. It would give you scene numbers and durations of every shot, and it would have dialogue and music cues, and it would describe the camera movements and the framing. It's a very, very detailed document. And so with Magnificent Ambersons, this document was created shortly before the film was taken apart, because this all happened very close to the scheduled premiere. So they were in the motions of finalizing the edit of the film when all this kind of went down. So you have this cutting script that on paper lays out precisely what everything would have looked like. You can say, oh, well, this was how I actually started off the reconstruction. Was I took a copy of the release version and then just compared it against the cutting continuity and started razoring in Adobe Premiere and putting in bits of slug, because I could go off the cutting script and know that, okay, after this shot, there was a 25-second shot here that was cut out. So I'm going to pop that in there, and I know this dialogue went here, and am able to, expand it out until it reaches the full original length. And then it just becomes a process of figuring out, like, what those missing pieces would have looked like. And I can go on and on. I can describe further, like, some of the process there of, like, recreating the scenes, because there actually was not a whole lot of guesswork. There is a lot of it's a very there's not a lot of creative license that takes place in this. Like, it's all pretty largely backed up by research material I found and documentation.
Well, and especially like research and documentation that was that you yourself dug into. I mean, I feel like that's a large part of what's missing, kind of from a lot of the coverage of this kind of thing in general, is the amount of human-led research and work that's done in order to then utilize AI for these types of films and ideas. And so. Um, yeah, that's fascinating. That's a really cool kind of approach to reviewing the this whole controversy, because I think that's something that I haven't seen a whole lot in the coverage
Hmm.
at all.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of also like riff off that where like just this week, just to kind of get in, give a little context from where I come from. I actually so I'm a data scientist in the day, and I use AI and machine learning pretty much every day. But I come from a math background, and the use of AI in math, the math world is making headlines right now, and a lot of people are getting really, I guess, apocalyptic about how they're talking about things, because there are going to be some, proofs of conjectures that are going to be attributed to AI very soon, if not already started this week. And it's interesting because when you talk to people about these things, they start getting, oh, AI is going to take over, it's going to change the landscape of things. And I think that's true. But what I'm interested in is the questions we're still poking and putting AI towards are still very human generated and human led. And I'm really interested in like, what are the ways that people are using this in highly human led ways,
Mhm.
and kind of the journeys to that point, because I think when you scratch the surface you find actually a lot of like humanity in how people are
Uh-huh.
using these. So
Oh yeah, you gave me the perfect entry point because something with AI that is not is not being touched upon. That is, I sense it. It's kind of subtextual, but it's there. Is there is a there is this streak I've noticed within people who are opposed to AI, where the subtext of their arguments really seems to be a great concern that a field that has heretofore been fairly gate kept and closed off from entry by a lot of other people is suddenly about to be thrown wide open, and not just filmmaking, but in a lot of fields. Um, there. I wish I could find it, but on Twitter, like there was somebody who posted about said that the fact that there is so much slop being made by AI is proof that most people have no business creating art. Was something there. I thought that was telling, and there. If I could quote something here, because I just love this. I want to find out who this gentleman is, who this person is, because it's the best summation of I think what AI really amounts to and where it's going to really become. And it was a comment made on a review at RogerEbert.com for a documentary called Deep Faking Sam Altman. And it's a typical documentary, kind of looking at like the specter of AI and everything. And a person named the Boomer Vault, great name, wrote this amazing comment, and I'll kind of try to pick and choose here, like sort of like the best little bits here. Um, this AI accidentally demonstrates one of the oldest patterns in media history. When a new creative technology shows up, our first serious cultural responses tend to frame it as a moral panic, a psychological hazard, or a parlor trick, usually all three, long before we understand what it actually becomes in everyday hands. Um, let's see here, and then kind of jumping further. Okay, and then here's the next little bit. here's a far more interesting question about AI is what happens when creation itself becomes cheaper, faster, and less gate-kept? For filmmakers without budgets, for artists without industry connections, for people with ideas but no access to actors, studios, or financing, AI isn't just an ethics thought experiment, it's a lever, a big one. The camera did this once, desktop editing did it again, YouTube did it again, Photoshop, GarageBand, the printing press. I think that's
Yeah.
for me. I think that's really telling. I mean, I'll make a prediction here, and I think this is really what it boils down to. What scares the people who are the most vociferously opposed to AI is someday, and I think it's going to happen very soon. There's going to be a filmmaker out there who's going to make a film that will have the production values of a Marvel superhero movie, and they're going to do it with virtually no budget, using off-the-shelf computing technology and AI. And I think that is what scares a lot of people. Is that anybody will potentially have the tools to create on that level. And for me, I personally think that is fantastic. I love the idea that anybody can be a participant and create anything to their heart's content.
Yeah, I definitely see that kind of happening, especially when you look at, when you think about like what models are available. Well, you've got the big names where the Anthropics, the Open AIs, and yes, some of the I guess frontier models is what they call them, are there, but the open source community isn't far behind, and eventually you're going to be able to like host you know a large language model or something else on your laptop, and I do think when I use these things at work, I try not to like lose my mind over them, because it is intoxicating in some ways just to like let it do this report that I don't want to think about, and it'll do the data analysis for me, and that's great. But you don't want to get carried away, and I do think like there's gonna be like waves where we use it for one thing, and then we realize like, oh, this actually has limitations in this way, and then it builds out its own work ethic in it too, and you start seeing like, oh yes, someone was able to make this like Marvel level movie, but they probably weren't able to make it with just a single like prompt or anything like that. There's still, even if it was cheaply made, it was still going to be like a deep effort that someone did. So
Oh yeah, and the other thing I think that's where AI poses a lot of promise is I think it will help to reaffirm the importance and the value of human creativity. I've seen that, I feel like, with every new technological innovation that comes along. I've been active in the film industry long enough that I can remember when digital was first coming up, and how people were just panicking, like just like this is going to be the death of cinema, and digital isn't true film. And I knew one filmmaker who just said that he would quit making films. He would never shoot digital. He would just sooner give up the whole craft of filmmaking uh, than sell out and shoot digital. And then there was those people who said that, well, the only true way to see a movie is on a film print, which has its own kind of privilege. I love seeing a film print, but if it weren't for digital, there would be so many movies that would never get seen, because you just there just isn't a print available, or there isn't a theater in like a small town that can show it. And so what's happened is as digital has come up and as streaming has come up, there has been, as a result, a greater appreciation for things that I would think we previously took for granted. Um, there's a theater in my town which recently installed 70 millimeter film projection. And it's just amazing. They now have a whole line of the 35 millimeter and 70 millimeter film programs, and they're selling out, and people are coming again to see these shows, and it's a magnificent thing. Whereas before, people might not have really noticed or cared. Like, well, 35 millimeter, what's that? Now it's like, oh, this is really, really special. And I think going forward, I would imagine they'll have maybe separate categories in awards festivals where you'll have AI driven films, and then you'll have films that, okay, this film is 100% human made, and maybe it will have to go through some more rigorous vetting, just like the distinction between organic food versus non-organic. And I don't think I've never really accepted this notion of either or.
Yeah.
You have to choose one or the other. It's they're all, to me, they're all just tools. AI is great for this Ambersons project. Before that, I shot my last project on 16 millimeter black and white because it was the right medium for that particular project. I think it's all about being nimble, and I kind of roll my eyes a little bit at somebody that says, well, it's got to be one thing or it's got to be the other, and it's like, okay.
Well, to give you a little background, so it's funny. We've talked a little bit about AI on the show in the past. Jameson is a lot more open to it. I'm not vociferously against it, but I do have my doubts about it, and it's more about. I think it's more about the companies that control it, and the corporate interest and the extraction of profit and whatnot. That's my bigger issue. But I think you're right. I think there is an element that test case wise, like there are definitely uses where it can be done, like especially for research. Like I can see a world in which, like, you're dealing with a massive tome of medical information, and you're needing to put together a summation or a kind of sift through all of this medical information, and AI can do that much faster. Now, are there back checks that need to be done? Yes, of course. But that's pretty much with every tool. Like you've got to go back and you've got to fix things and find any bad information that might have found it's filtered its way in. But yeah, I think that's it's really fascinating to kind of hear your take on it, because I hadn't really thought about the fact that it kind of breaks down the gatekeeping or the elitism of some um, industries, and I think that's a really cool take on how it could adjust that. I think my general uh, in the back of my head, the issue with most technology is, did they do due diligence and like thinking about what this would change
Mm-hmm.
before they did it? That's my bigger issue. But
Yeah.
but I think you're head on. I think you're right on with kind of what the positive aspects of what could happen here with the use of AI, especially in kind of breaking open those gates.
And I've certainly noticed something with with the those who express skepticism to outright opposition to AI. Something that does kind of leap out as a concern to me is that this if because I certainly think that there is a lot of important criticisms of AI and concerns that should be considered. But if one takes an absolutely uncompromising position on it, I think the result is that they just won't even get a seat at the table in terms of like where this is headed. Um, I've kind of experienced this personally. This sort of kind of frustrating sense that the goalpost constantly shifts. Where if you Google the Magnificent Ambersons, and you'll find the common comment about it is that it's the holy grail of lost films, and people say, oh, what if we could see what this film was like, what Orson Welles intended, and so then uh, Versace and I come along and say, well, I think we can do it. I think we have the technology to do it. and the reaction is how dare you? People said, how dare you think that you can know what Orson Welles intended, and then their reaction, and another common thing is, well, what about the families? What about all the estates and the descendants of these actors? Which that's a very important, it's a very important ethical consideration, and it's one that we're working with in terms of reaching out to the relatives and the estates of these various actors to make all assurances there, that their rights are considered. But then to reference another project, there's a film that's been in the news recently that's going to feature Val Kilmer, an AI version of Val Kilmer. And there's a situation where, at least to my understanding, he gave his blessing before he died, and his daughter is actively involved in this project. But then go to any comments in the articles on these things, and what are the responses? Oh, those greedy estates, those greedy so and so's. Why can't you just let the dead rest in peace? And it's kind of like, come on, where's the line in the sand here? Because every time there's kind of like well, how about this? Okay, we'll do this. Like, well, then they kind of shift the goalpost further down, and the risk is again that ultimately you could wind up in a situation where, like what happened with prohibition, to use an analogy that seems dissimilar. Prohibition actually could have worked in this country, because like the vast majority of the population supported the prohibition of hard distilled alcohols, whiskeys, and such. But what happened was after they passed the amendment, and then they had to pass legislation that gave the amendment teeth, and that legislation was called the Volstead Act. Well, the Volstead Act was so hardline and restrictive that it banned beer, wine, cider, like even sauerkraut and vanilla extracts would have technically been illegal. That's how hardline it was. And suddenly all these
part
people,
of Jameson just died right then.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, you had all these people who were like, "Wait, what? We didn't, we all thought this was just going to ban this one thing. We weren't like, you're banning everything." And and then like, as prohibition, because they kind of flailed along and they struggled to enforce it, and they repeatedly would reach out to the anti-saloon league and the prohibition lobby, and they say, well, can you compromise with us? Can we at least allow wine and beer and everything? We're ready to like ban this other stuff. And they would say, no, we're not compromising. And in the end, they wound up losing the whole thing. They just repealed the entire amendment, because they didn't compromise at a key time when the discussion needed to take place. And I think right now we're at that key moment where the discussion needs to take place, because AI, it's the genie is out of the bottle. AI is here. You're not going to just just shut this thing down. But what it can happen is we can discuss how AI is implemented and how it can be done ethically. And the hope with this Ambersons project is that we can kind of set the tone for how it can be done ethically, because we are going to be employing a lot of people, and we're going to be using AI in service to something that really would not be possible were it not for a machine learning and this technology. And I think the result is hopefully going to be one that can show where this technology can be really applicable.
Yeah, I think you're correct with that. The genie's out of the bottle. I mean, and in some ways, like the genie's been out of the bottle for like 20 years. I think people don't realize like how much like the principles of these things have actually been very much in use. Like, when we talk about,
It's called spell check on Word,
well,
which is a form of AI.
but
Yeah,
even like,
it was Clipster. Clipster was the beginning of it all.
yeah, even just like, the principles of machine learning are also just very, very simple. And yes, like LLMs are a very sophisticated use of that, but like, do you just ban like machine learning algorithms that like run this thing, or what restrictions would you put into place? And I think your like warning about about like not getting a seat at the table is actually a really important thing to remember. And I to bring it back to the movie, it feels very like like important in that respect because Ambersons is about and I think the article, like the New Yorker article that like profiles your project, makes this connection at the end. There's this really like big speech that one of the characters gives where he talks about the changes that the automotive technologies are going to make in 10 to 20 years. And I think in that article there's a clip where your colleague is talking about how you could just switch that out with AI. And um, in a way, I took kind of the Ambersons as this family that didn't want things to change and kind of missed out on jumping into the next world. And there's like a sadness in that. And yes, the old world is good. There were beautiful things about it, but in some ways the world is still going to move on. So
Yeah, it's we see to not to get all kind of esoteric, but there is kind of a full circle moment using AI to engage in this conversation about a film that is also really delving into one of the most consequential technologies of the 20th century. And at its heart, Ambersons, I don't think, is for or against these technological changes. It's mainly just asking people to consider for a moment um, what will be gained and what will be lost by any particular technological innovation. I think the for me the key phrase in the film is toward the beginning where it talks about the mule drawn streetcar that stops for the lady who whistles from her upstairs window, and she comes down and grabs her coat and hops on board, and then it starts again. And Wells, the narrator, comments that it's too slow for us nowadays. For the faster we're carried, the less time we have to spare. Every technology, I think about all of us can kind of remember the time before smartphones versus the time after, and kind of with that
before the
that
internet.
that contrast. We remember the internet before and after, and and when I think about kids growing up now, I don't think, oh, our times were better, and kids those days with their darn iPhones. Uh, no, I think I think of like, oh, there were a lot of things where I really would have loved to have had a smartphone growing up. Um, and if anything, I maybe just feel a little sad for kids that, oh, they're not going to experience the shopping mall as we knew it, because like everything that they want to find, they can find at their fingertips, they can find online, and the others. That's the main thing. Or uh, the having to call your mom from a payphone if you're out biking
Yeah.
somewhere, and
Yeah.
having to tell when you're going to be home. Just those little things like that. Those little memories are like, oh, it's kind of too bad kids won't get to experience that part of life. But that's okay too. They're going to have their own experiences, and then I guarantee you, there's going to be some new technology that will come along that we can't envision, which then those kids who grew up in the smartphones will talk about, oh boy, I just wish those kids these days, they could have just experienced what life was like. It was so much simpler when we just had the smartphone and everything. And it always comes full circle, always.
Well, it was interesting in the article you sent us, the article from the New Yorker. I mean, they even noted the fact that the Orson Welles estate was skeptical of the use of AI in general, and they, once they got to know you and Edward, it seemed like they were coming around. It read as if they were still skeptical, but they had faith that y'all's approach was being as upfront and ethical as possible. And I thought that was a really interesting little moment in the piece that if you just kind of read it and move right past it, you don't realize like this is the antidote to the kind of hardline commenters that you see.
Yeah.
No, it's not simple. Like even the people involved in this have their doubts. There are some skeptical elements to it. It's not just either or. And I think that's like you talked about the prohibition. Like the discussion needs to be had, but like the time of the prohibition, I don't think we're in a space where nuance is really considered a thing we want right now, which is a little terrifying in its own right.
Oh, yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you have anything else, Jameson, on Magnificent
I
AI-mbersons?
I just had one question, which is so we're talking about this theatrical version. I guess if you could if you could give us like a summary of what drew you specifically about the difference in the storytelling, and what do you think the, I guess we'll call it like the director's cut that doesn't exist yet, but might someday. What do you think it captures about the story that the theatrical version misses?
Well, it's a number of things. And you have to we have to recall like the context in which this film, when the film was being made, the United States was not yet involved in World War II. And by the time the production was completed, Pearl Harbor had been attacked. The United States was in the war, and the climate completely changed. And so it's very much a film of the pre-war pre-war age. I mean, I think if um, if Orson Welles had made The Magnificent Ambersons as his first film instead of Citizen Kane, like if it had come out in 1941 instead of 1942, I think there would have been very little to do about releasing it in the version that he wanted. Uh, but then, by spring of 1942, the mood was escapism, and it was all about musicals, and it was about patriotic type films. And I've read the transcripts of the comment cards filled out by the people who attended the disastrous preview screening where they previewed this cut, and this audience had just finished seeing a musical called The Fleetsin'. And then they showed this, more than 2 hour film that's, about the decay of this family as their town turns into this sooty, darkened, city. And the reactions were just full of comments of, that we don't need this right now. We need happy films. We need to escape from worries and not be, educated. I think one person put it. So, because it's a very somber film. It's basically positing in this particular case kind of the loss of the unique character of this town as it turns into a city, and it becomes kind of just this sort of anonymous sprawling metropolis. There's also some elements in the original version, a lot of criticisms of industry and of automobiles that were in the original cut get cut out, for a couple of reasons. One being that, again, again, we're in the early days of the war. Industry is beginning to tool up. It's going to be an important part of that war machine. So I don't think the studio wanted a film that seemed to be critical of the impact industrialization has on cultural life in the United States. And there was also concern. I've actually read some really interesting memos about this, that they would get experience the same things that happened when Citizen Kane came out, where that film. There was a lot of rumors that it was based on William Randolph Hearst, which is about 75% true. There were a number of other people that were. It's definitely an amalgam, but it's primarily based on William Randolph Hearst. And Hearst leveraged his newspapers and all of his control in the various sections of media to essentially blackball the film, and that really hurt its box office punch. This film that was otherwise really critically well received. And in the early publicity materials for Ambersons, there were people in the gossip pages that were speculating, oh, who's Orson Welles going to be critiquing now? And when they heard it was a film about the automobiles, they said, oh, his next target must be Henry Ford, which, to be fair, Morgan is, there's definitely some elements in there that he's kind of like loosely, very, very loosely based on Henry Ford. You can see a bit of that Ford script in the Morgan automobile. So there's a little bit there, but they definitely were wanting to head off like anything that could like potentially tick off some other big industrial magnet that would, just turn against them and then cause them to lose money on another film. So it was very much a reactionary re-editing of the film, I think.
Yeah.
That's
Power
interesting.
of historical forces, man.
Yeah. That's interesting to think about, because I feel like Eugene is definitely the most likable, off the cuff character. One of the scenes, this just kind of made me laugh. One of my favorite scenes was not laugh, but like there's a funny aspect to this in the theatrical cut. But like the scene where the patriarch general or major Amberson is like finally having this moment of like thinking through things and just like, kind of reflecting on his life, and he's talking about the sun and the sun death of the earth and stuff. And in your version, or the director's cut version, it goes on longer, and then George like cuts him off from his thoughts because he's not paying attention to anything. But in the theatrical version, it like fades out real fast, and I feel like that's like the studio being like, we don't want to cause people to think about these things. So
that's like the one scene that I really get angry, at those involved, that they cut so much. And I always think, they couldn't have just left that one bit, because that was the moment, the really like kind of the valedictory for that actor Richard Bennett, who was a vaudevillian, who Orson Welles kind of like found living in a flop house basically, and sort of like gave him this winter role, the winter of his career. And that was going to be his great moment. And it's a really fantastic performance from what survives. And yeah, you can just tell like the way they just fade out. They don't even have the decency to let him have this moment. They just effectively just kind of like, play like play him off stage, essentially.
You could almost say it's the one redemptive moment in the film in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it was one of my favorite scenes, and it was frustrating watching it and seeing it like fade out, in the theatrical cut. And so not knowing what kind of the original was, I was wondering, and I was kind of like happily surprised that there was a longer version of it too. So that's cool.
Yeah, and it's so profound. It really is such a beautiful scene.
Well, and it's there's an emotion there that, because of the nature of the Ambersons and the other people in the movie, there's an emotion there that's not really presented to the audience throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah, or I also think of, it's just probably my favorite scene. It's one of my favorite scenes in films is the depot scene.
Oh, yeah.
When Uncle Jack is saying goodbye, and it rates right up there with the white parasol scene from Citizen Kane, where Bernstein talks about how funny memory is, that he glanced at a woman once 30 years ago and he still thinks about her like ever since. And here's a scene where yeah, Jack is talking about, this woman that he loved and he thought he couldn't live without. He remembered saying goodbye to her, and then he says, now I don't know where she lives or if she is even living. Then what does he says? Uh, time and money are both like loose quicksilver in a nest of cracks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man. So good. So good.
Yeah.
Well, let's go and jump into our film to discuss that, because I think there's some interesting parallels with kind of what we've talked about, especially your kind of breakdown of the historical factors that went into the studio's editing of the film. So you chose 1933's Gabriel over the White House, which I don't know about Jameson. I had never heard of it. And from the movie poster, I thought this was going to be like a different version of, like, I don't know, A Wonderful Life or The Minister's Wife or something like that.
Oh, no.
And it is not that.
It is one of the most terrifying films I've ever
It's
seen.
yeah. And it's so fascinating because, okay, so the setup is that we have this kind of, in a lot of ways he's kind of the prototypical politician. Says a lot of things, means maybe some of them vaguely, but he's really there to kind of keep the party line and to have the power that it kind of incurs with the role of president. And he gets into a car wreck and something happens, and that's the fun part about this movie, is that they completely hide any of the, like, uh, angelic presence. It's more of a psychological element almost. And something changes, and he becomes very much I would say in the beginning, it almost sounds like he's going to become like a proto FDR. But it takes a really serious and bad turn as we go through, and you're like, oh no, this is turning into more like a Mussolini in a lot of ways. So Brian, what led you to pick this movie specifically to discuss? Because I'm
Yeah.
curious about what you see in this movie that speaks to us right now.
Well, yeah, of course I wanted to, like, was really kind of trying to rack my brain thinking of, like, what's a good forgotten film. Um, and so I wanted, like, oh, let's go for a deep cut. And so I pick this one. Well, if it does tie into Ambersons, or maybe in the whole AI discussion, is this notion that, like at least me as a historian, there's very little that surprises me, quite frankly. There's always just, like, it's just what we're seeing now are like new models of the old, but from the same manufacturer. And for all that. If I can be excused for getting political, but for all that is being said right now about the state of the United States and and the current presidential administration, and I think that, of course, the criticisms are certainly justified in a lot of ways, but people, there's this reaction I see in a lot of people that, like, that these are unprecedented things that are going on, and we're never going to recover. There's this really kind of almost apocalyptic notion, and I just get more the sense of, like, this is not something that is terribly new. We've had Donald Trumps before. Like Andrew Jackson. I think Andrew Jackson did. Um, I think the consequences of his policies were incredibly horrible. I mean, Indian genocide. And then in the 1930s, where you have this film, which is basically arguing for why America needs a dictator. And it presents as a positive this guy who his policies, like, really strongly mirror the policies of Donald Trump now. There's I'm trying to think of all the things in this film. There are, scenes where the president, in order to try to curb organized crime, basically meets with a gangster who seems to be kind of a stand-in for Al Capone. He's got a scarred face and everything, and he says that you should remove yourself. You need to go back to your country. which is that's a major like platform
Mm-hmm.
today now, is sending all these quote unquote criminals back to the countries they came from. You never mind that this Nick Diamond character, has obviously been in the United States long enough that he has no accent, so it begs the question, well, was he even born here? But it's still, there's kind of, there is sort of that 1930s kind of eugenicist
Mm-hmm.
dog whistling going on, that, well, he's not really an American, whether the implication is because he's an Italian American or he's a Jewish American. I mean, they don't really get into that, but I think just the notion that, well, he's not a real American, so he needs to go back to wherever he came from. Never mind that, well, he certainly sounds like he's been in America a long time. And then, of course, the climax of the film, where you basically have the president holding the whole world hostage, threatening to use devastating weapons if they don't disarm and pay off their debts to the United States. I particularly like nationalization of, well, we're not going to bother with repealing the 18th Amendment. We're just going to we're just going to have government get in on the organized racketeering, and we're going to have national liquor stores and military tribunals where they just execute people by firing squad. I mean, this is a film that's arguing that those things, like, that's what we need. And yeah, we're a country that I think has always been fascinated by strong people and people of will who will sweep through the bureaucracy to get things done. And if a few people get killed along the way, that's fine. That's the price you pay.
Yeah, there's also the bullying of Congress. When he goes in there and he's like, well, martial law, and then they just cede all the control to him. So
yeah,
yeah.
it really is a film I think everyone should watch, because it says so much about the American character that the problem. I mean, Trump to me is a symptom. And he's a symptom of something deep within the American character that has been there. I think probably since the beginning. When Washington could have very easily been a military dictator or a king had he so wanted it. The people were ready to give him that power, and he just had the good character to resist that. But we've always been fascinated by that, and it's a film that I hope would awaken in people the realization that this is something that we have to confront within ourselves. It's not just a matter of like, oh well, once we vote out Donald Trump, or once he's no longer president, or whatever, then things will be fine.
Well, and there's an element of the film where you're, like I said at the beginning when I was describing the movie. There's an element at the beginning where you think he's actually going to go full force into the kind of labor movement, and there's an element there where you're like, no, this there's a potential for authoritarian dictators on any side of the political spectrum if you are given the power and you have the certain ability or foresight to basically destroy any kind of democratic institutions to get what you want. Because it was such a weird turn for me, because I generally kind of I lean towards the Marxist side of things in a lot of ways, with the labor movements, and I was like, oh, like Gabriel came and kind of woke him up, and now he's seeing things for how the actual normal common person is seeing things, and and that's kind of how it starts. But then you realize oh no, this is something else is driving him here. And it becomes more apparent as it kind of goes on, and you're it goes from what looks to be almost a feel good movie into this horrid nightmare by the end, especially when he's on the ship and he's got the gathering of all of the countries, and he's bombing the new ships out in the water, and you're like, oh wow, okay, no, this is how easily it is we can slip into those kind of ways of thinking on any side of the political spectrum.
It's like if Frank Capra directed a Rod Serling
Oh yeah, very much
screenplay.
so. Yeah, because
Yeah,
And it's kind of like, yeah,
there's an element of it where you're like, oh, he's going to become kind of like the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where he's going to be like, he's going to demand his way and he's going to like get what he wants, and it's for the betterment of the country. But that is not how it turns out. And man, what a wild approach
yeah.
to kind of telling that story.
Yeah, and it shows too how like you can weaponize a base.
Mhm.
He like with this, he it starts off as like, oh, he's gonna really he's a friend of labor, and you're gonna a lot of these are very kind of reflecting sort of proto FDR policies, where FDR would just through his the so-called alphabet soup, the NRA and the TVA and the WPA, all these things to get people working again. And in the film, you see that what does he do to get men back to work? He says, "Well, I'm going to induct you all into the army, basically, and I'm going to make an army of construction." Um, and you see that, well, I guess you can kind of see a good there, but then but then now he also has basically a personal army that is going to be loyal to him, that he can start to command to do whatever he wants.
And then his own assistant becomes the head of the tribunal, and you're just like, oh crap, like.
Oh yeah, yeah, there is no, I mean, yeah, there is that one little bit where he says, oh yeah, you can have a lawyer, you can have any lawyer you want, and we'll pay for it all. But then it quickly becomes clear that is not a fair trial those guys are getting at all. It is a kangaroo court or a drumhead court martial. There was never any question what the outcome was going to be, and then they're, I mean, all but summarily executed. Executing guys for essentially being small time criminals, but just because, well, you attacked a government nationalized industry, well, that makes you traitors.
And what a powerful scene where they execute those guys. I mean, that's
Yeah,
the camera pans away as they shoot.
to
You're
the
just like,
Statue of
oh
Liberty.
gosh, yeah, yeah. The
Yeah,
symbolism is very like on point in this film.
yeah, and again, it's like it seems like, I mean, the concern I guess I have as people watching is that people will think, oh, this has to be a satire. Like, no, this is not. Like, I mean, this was, I mean, William Randolph Hearst was involved in this production. As my understanding is that they even consulted people in the FDR White House when it came to writing the script. So, like, this was very much functioning as a kind of a plea for, this is what we need. This is what the country needs right now.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
wild.
And then you have, the choice of Gabriel, and they kind of talk about this in the movie, which is like, this is actually kind of an angel of destruction and also,
Revelation. Yeah,
revelation. So yeah, that's interesting.
And I do like that the film kind of always plays a bit coy, whether or not, like, what is he really divinely inspired, or is this guy a madman?
Yeah.
Which again has some very Trumpian things here, because you have a segment of the population who do see Trump as a almost like a prophet kind of figure, a person who's going to usher in Christian nationalism, whereas others look at him and say, like, are you people nuts? This guy is, I mean, this guy, like he's all but telling you he's the Antichrist, there's both sides, like the way what they imprint upon this president we have now, but you can also imprint upon this character in the film. It's like, is this guy being led by the divine, or is this guy suffering from a head injury and
literal brain injury?
Literal brain injury, and he is slowly going insane.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it just ends on such an abrupt note, right? Like, he's signing this peace treaty and just immediately dies as soon as he finishes his signature. And then the film ends too. Like, it doesn't even give you like there's there's like a couple minutes after that, but like it doesn't really give you like this sense of closure about anything that happens. It just ends, which I
Yeah.
thought was very strange and almost like off centering. So
Because then you'd have to grapple with the some call it a bug, some call it a feature of dictatorships, which is that when the dictator dies, all of a sudden the knives come out,
Yeah.
and then who is going to fill the power vacuum here? And once they do fill the power vacuum, the first president was able to do all these things so easily. Well, the next president can undo them just as easily.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because the concept of Gabriel coming to the sky, I mean, it could definitely be read in the light of our current president, but there's another way you could kind of look at it, in that Gabriel came to bring this revelation to the sky as a punishment. Because I don't know if you've your relationship with any kind of like scripture or anything like that, but there's angels are not like sweet, cherubs in the sky. They were there to take care of business, and they were delivering information that could curse or bless a whole nation. And I think you could almost read this as, if you're prone to, um, you could read this as, oh no, Gabriel came to him because he knew that this was the direction the nation was going anyways, and so he's going to just deliver the final blow. Um, I think that's an interesting kind of approach to it, and it almost reads like in the final scene where he's on the verge of dying and he's speaking to Bindi, I think it is, and he is saying like he's the spirit of Gabriel or whatever it is has left him, and he's talking about like, was I a good president? Was I the man you hoped I'd be? And it's this kind of weird like he is so like wrapped up in this idea of who he is, that it almost ends on a downer note. Like I don't think Hearst and those who wanted this dictatorial like approach as the only means of like governing ended up telling us like with that final scene what they wanted to tell us, because it almost came off as pitiful more than anything. um I don't know, that's
Yeah.
it's a fascinating,
It,
like there's different ways you could look at it.
It reminds me of another really interesting film to watch, that I watched in a history class on the British colonial empire, and it's called Sanders of the River. Um, Let me double check I've got that right. Yeah, Sanders of the River. Um, and it's notable because it has Paul Robeson has a role in it, and it was this really phenomenal actor, and the film is today mainly studied because it's kind of considered this artifact of like the British colonial era, because it's this film that's very much advocating for why the British Empire is good, why colonialism is good, and that it's needed to keep Africa, the African continent, in control because they can't manage themselves. But the thing is the whole film, is kind of posits how, like, because one person, the Sanders, it's been a while since I've seen it, but if memory serves, Sanders is initially thought dead, and in the vacuum that his power leaves, so you have all these tribes that suddenly like start to vie for power and everything, and Sanders isn't dead, and Sanders returns, and it basically requires, like British soldiers armed with machine guns mowing down all these natives to reestablish order. And it kind of unintentionally shows how unsustainable colonialism is. It basically it argues for it unintentionally argues for why it's going to fail as a system. This film that's trying to advocate for it, because the only way they're able to keep everybody in line is by massacring them at the end, and it all is because of one person is keeping things in control.
Yeah, that doesn't always speak well of of British colonialism when it comes to
I
actually showing on screen the mowing down of whole tribes.
Yeah, no,
So,
I love films like that that are like that are I don't know. I guess I don't know if they would necessarily fall. If they would be considered camp. Camp films. I mean,
mhm.
like real camp. There has to be a certain earnestness,
Yeah,
and it's all about how they kind of like just go spectacularly wrong, and so maybe there's a camp aesthetic, but it's more like this fact that like these they're trying to make one propaganda argument and they inadvertently make the opposite
exactly.
argument.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and part of me wonders if it's just kind of inherent in the nature of telling a story, that the work of creating a movie and creating that narrative and telling a story that is going to reach an audience, like the nature of story is to almost deconstruct the agendas that you're going into the movie to make. Um, and it's not always conscious. It's subconscious a lot of times. But I think it's like what you were saying with that movie and this with Gabriel over the White House and numerous others. Um, just to tell a good story, you almost have to drop the ideology and allow humanity to come in, and at that point, the audience can read it however they want to. It's out of their control as to how the film is taken um, as a pro-colonial or an anti-colonial take on it.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I guess I shouldn't like draw like paint with such a wide brush, but anytime a film is trying to like sell me on an argument, is trying to convince me of something, I feel like it's already kind of lost, like or more my eyes start to roll in the back of my head. It's like, oh man, don't try to don't try to sell me on something here.
Well, and I think there's even a difference between, like, because I found Gabriel of the White House, even though it was terrifying and a vision of power that is not that is unhindered. Um, it was highly watchable. Like, my eyes were not. I was not distracted during the movie. I was in it, and I was like, okay, what is going to happen next? Whereas I think that's significantly different than some of the movies in the last 20, 30 years, where it's the intent is to make a ideological point, uh, and the subtext is so heavily text that it ceases to be a
Mm.
fun movie. Like it
it,
ceases to be a fascinating movie.
it's you can like there I'm trying to think of a few examples of this, but like there's a certain like kind of like type of movie where as you watch you can just like picture the filmmaker like having read an article that came up in their feed on Instagram, and like based on that they were suddenly like, my goodness, this is going on, well we need to tell the world about this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like, oh, I can think of a good example. Um, oh shoot, I just had the title and I just lost it. It was the film that was made just a couple of years ago. Um, about the drug cartel boss who transitions to become a woman.
Oh,
Oh
Shoot, what
yeah.
oh,
was the title of it?
yeah,
Oh,
I'd erased it from my memory.
I
yeah.
didn't
I did
ever
not
see
think
it,
about it.
but I remember. I mean, it got
Yeah,
memed to
yeah. I mean,
all
it
hell.
was
Um,
it's gonna be a camp classic
Yeah,
in the future.
no
But
doubt.
just remember watching and just thinking like, wow, you can just tell these filmmakers like you know just recently read an article about this and they thought this is an important story that we can tell. And
And there is
well,
no
and
nuance whatsoever at all
no,
because they haven't researched it enough to like give it any nuance or any humanity.
no.
well, and sometimes it's even that article. Like, I don't know if you guys remember. Like, this was like 10 years ago. There was this article called "Cat Person" that was like told as a horror story, but it was like kind of like a Me Too story. But they ended up making an actual movie about it, and it was it was kind of like a flavor of the week viral thing, and it didn't need to really continue. But someone had this idea that they were like, oh, I gotta, turn this into a movie. So
Well, and the soil was ripe for it at that time too.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
oh man, yeah, such a wild idea. I mean, there's part of me that is as an audience member watching Gabriel over the White House. There's an element of this, and I think I jokingly tell this to a group of my friends, even though they hate it. I'm one of the few people that they know that has watched a Serbian film, which I don't know if you know anything about that movie, Brian, but it is highly problematic in so many ways. I watched it on YouTube, and I mean, I would never watch it again, but there was talent there.
What?
I was just like, I
think you dropped out there for a second. What was the title
sorry.
of it again?
Serbian film.
Serbian film. Okay.
Yeah, it's a horror film. It's from like I can't remember the country, but it's somewhere in the Eastern Bloc. And yeah, it's a really, like, it's banned in so many countries. You really can't find a copy of it anywhere. I watched it on YouTube, and it was like cut into 2 or 3 parts, and it's probably been taken down since. But even then, like, there's an element of Gabriel at the White House where you're like, I am appalled by what I'm watching, but there's such significant talent on display in the making of it that it's that battle within yourself where you're like, none of this should be pleasing, and yet I am enwrapped in this. And I think that's the power of film. Like, I think that's the power of a narrative film, and is that, like, it can take you to really dark, horrid places that you, generally speaking, ethically don't want to go to, and ends up telling you a story that is a cautionary tale or a morality tale or something like that. But I think it's instructive as well as entertaining, and I think that's such a profound concoction of elements whenever you're dealing with subject matter like this.
Yeah, it's. I'm just trying to think of a good way to follow up what you said. That was an excellent statement, but yeah, it's a product of its time, and it's it's a jaw dropper. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and the lead actor is terrific. Like, he does a great job. Like,
yeah, it's Walter Houston. He's an Academy. He'll be an Academy Award winner in another 10 years. His co-star Francho Tone in a couple of years, he'll get a Best Actor nomination for Mutiny on the Bounty. The director made a terrific comedy, like just I think a year later, called My Man Godfrey.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So they all would, and again, it's made by MGM. MGM, it's a little bit hard now because MGM really only exists as a logo, I think, that's used by Amazon Studios. But in the 1930s, MGM was the premier motion picture studio. That was the studio you looked toward for, like, oh, who's going to make like the this year's Oscar contenders, who's going to make the most serious artistic content, to use a bit of an anachronism word for a 1930s picture, but it's MGM. I mean, it's the equivalent, I think, of, if A24
That's
today,
what I was thinking.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking too.
made a film, that was arguing, what we need is we need a dictator.
That's fascinating.
But I was kind of looking at the context in which this film was made, and it was made within 27 days of FDR becoming president and actually entering office, and then December of the same year, I believe it was, that the 18th Amendment was repealed.
Yeah.
And you're just like there's no doubt that this kind of information was kind of in the ambient air of the time, but it's still pretty prescient in a lot of ways. I mean, there was no certainties there.
It's almost, given that context, like it almost does read like a film that is attempting to lobby the White
Yeah,
House, like arguing
exactly.
that FDR, this is what you need to do.
Yep. Which is
Yeah.
such a wild idea, knowing FDR and how he approached things.
It's fascinating because, and I think you guys have touched on this, like it was, it was kind of this like lobby piece, or it can be read like that, but we're watching it almost 100 years later and we're like, oh, it kind of has stood the test of time in the fact that it telegraphs a lot of what we're doing now, or where we're at now, which is fascinating. I did want to throw in, Walter Houston won the Academy Award for, and I just saw this on Wikipedia, for Treasures of Sierra Madre, which
is a terrific film.
Yes, and he co-starred with Tim Holt from Magnificent Ambersons. So it's
okay,
linking those.
Nice.
So yeah,
nice. Yeah, it's man, yeah. I'm really glad that you picked this movie, Brian, because I had never heard of it.
Yeah,
It was not even remotely on my radar. I have never seen any writing about it, even in passing.
Yeah, I thought like picking a nice deep cut would be be a fun one.
It was
always appreciated. Always appreciated on the podcast.
Yeah, we always end up with films that are like from the 1960s or 70s that are intentionally not seen because they're not good. So, or the early 90s. That's another big one. Go ahead.
I was saying I was torn. The other thought I had was I was thinking about suggesting a brand new film called The Testament of Anne Lee,
Oh, I wanted to see that.
which was completely overlooked. Had a terrible. I mean, really was a victim of like one of the worst, rollout campaigns. And I think it was the best film of the year. I think that's a film that, like, if I had to name a film that I think in 20 years critics are going to look back on and say, "What the heck was the Academy thinking, not picking this for a bunch of Oscars?" It's that film.
I still haven't seen it. I wanted to see it mainly because I'm really fascinated with that period of religious history, but also I actually happened to turn the soundtrack on, and it is a terrific soundtrack.
It's effectively a musical.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and it's you can almost sense the terror that's going on in the music itself without even having seen the movie. But yeah, no, it had every, like, when I saw the trailer for it, I was like, that has all of the ingredients that I like in a movie.
Yeah, I saw the trailer and I thought, oh, it's going to win Best Cinematography. Amanda Seyfried's going to get a nomination and all these, and then it got nothing.
Yeah, yeah, that's always rough. Whenever I feel like that's pretty much, there's at least a movie or two every year that gets completely overlooked and it ends up becoming like one of those cult favorites, or a film that, I remember, back when I was still watching the Oscars back in the mid to late 90s, there are movies that completely, looked overlooked, and now we're talking about them as if they're like these grand classics. And that's the nature of,
And that's such fun too. Like that's one of the things I love about getting older is seeing seeing what films emerge as new classics, and people looking back, they talk about like, oh wow, 2007, that was a fantastic year for movies, because you had There Will Be Blood and
No Country for Old Men.
Yeah, No Country for Old Men. I mean, that was a fantastic year. People talk about, 1999, that was an amazing year for movies. It's neat seeing those years starting to crop up against, the more commonly mentioned years, 1939 and 1974 and 1994.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's well, and anyone who like I've got a background in writing reviews on movies online for probably about a decade now, and I don't really do it much anymore. I kind of got tired of it, but whenever you kind of love movies, you enjoy that kind of that looking over history and saying like, you know, these are movies that are deeply celebrated now, and you go back and you read the history behind them and the reception at the time, and they're completely like derided, and you're like, it introduces questions about like what are the external contexts that create this movie not having an audience until 70 years later or 20 years later or whatever it might be. It opens up a whole new level of investigation for
You
people
it,
like us.
Yeah, and
yeah, it's
I think that doesn't really come until, like you were saying, Brian, until you get a little bit older, until you get some age between this, and you start seeing the films that you watched in your 20s, like in a new context, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, this is fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, like or I think of like yeah, how they take on different characters. Like I think of a movie like Forrest Gump,
Hmm.
which I can remember watching. It seemed like it was always on rotation on TNT or
Yep.
TBS, so I'd always
TNT
watch
definitely.
that. And that was that was like a modern classic right out of the gate. 1994, and then not too long ago I rewatched it and I was struck by like, wow, this is uh, a really reactionary movie. This is a very kind of like conservative, more kind of like a Reagan
Hmm.
inflected type film, because you have Gump, who is the who he always just follows, just does what everyone tells him, and he gets along great. And then there's that whole bit where he basically runs out all the black shrimp boat people, and it's implied that it's God's will that he
Yeah.
pushes them all out of the industry. And then
Then you have
meanwhile
the
you have
Vietnam War
poor
protest.
Jenny,
Yeah.
who's living the liberal, the liberated, the free love society experience, and she
Yeah.
just has a miserable life and dies a terrible death. And it's definitely like wow, this really has like a kind of a interesting political bent here I've never picked up
Yeah.
on.
Exactly. Well, I feel like that was probably I at least I remember because in the '90s I would have been pretty steeped in the conservative talk radio of the time, Rush Limbaugh and stuff like that, and uh, I remember especially the early to mid '90s being really. It was almost like there was a delayed reaction to the '70s by conservatives, and it didn't hit until the '90s. Because I remember it being really significant, like, and not only in like movies like Forrest Gump, but also in kind of the terminology and the language that was used by conservative talk radio hosts about I mean, at this point in the '90s, the hippies were already becoming a lot more, conservative in their own ways, and yet they're still like lampooning and lamenting the free love movement at the time, and like these liberal hippies, and and it's like you do realize that there's about 30 years of history that happened in between these two moments here. But you don't realize that at the time because that's what I grew up in, and that's the language I was used to. And so it wasn't until like later on in life where I was like, wow, like there was very little like understanding of any movement of history. It was very static in a lot of ways.
I think, you also had in the 90s, and it was growing since then, but I think you had kind of this swelling of the religious right, and
Yeah.
I think free love was a pretty easy boogeyman for
Oh yeah. Especially like purity culture and things like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and that kind of fits into Jenny,
Yeah.
being
Exactly.
this terrible villain for um Forrest Gump.
But yeah, even then, like
Poor Jenny.
of course, I haven't seen it in a long time either, and this may not in fact be there, at least in the text of the film. But even at the time when I saw Forrest Gump in the theater, I remember like even if she was meant to be a moral of the story kind of character, like don't do this or otherwise you'll end up lonely and diseased and all this, I still felt for her. Like I remember like being in the theater and just being like sad for that character and a real moment of empathy for a character that had made not great choices. But at the same time, like it's not like Forrest Gump is like the epitome of moral living. So um, it's like you said, he was he did what he told and he got along and he went with the flow, which is as we watched on Gabriel over the White House is not necessarily the good thing to do.
No.
Yeah. No, yeah. Thank you very much for bringing this movie to us. It was a shock to the system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I sent Jameson a message after I finished, and I was like, "Holy crap! What did I just watch?"
Yeah, it was a nice surprise. I mean, terrifying, but fun as a film
Yeah.
that you just wasn't expecting. Yeah.
I think just like to make a broader plug, I think like one of the richest like unexplored is too strong of a word, but like underexplored, we'll say. Underexplored like veins in cinema history is the pre-code era, of which this film is a part of that. Like that 1930 to 1934, there are just so many films being made that are just there. They're so mind-boggling what was being made back then, and it's so edgy. I mean, one of my all-time favorites is a film called Dr. X. It was directed by Michael Curtiz, who would go on to direct Casablanca. He's a really terrific filmmaker, and it was shot in early Technicolor, one of the earliest Technicolor films, and it's a horror film. It's Warner's attempt to compete with Universal by we're going to bring out a horror film, and this movie, I mean, it is. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. There is serial murder. There is cannibalism. There is implied necrophilia. There is prostitution. There is pornography. There is a a relationship which may or may not be incestuous. There is so much going on in that movie, and it's like, well, how the heck did they make this in 1932?
Oh wow! I
Yeah.
had heard the name Dr. X, but I've never seen it. I'm gonna have to put that on my list now because you've intrigued me.
Yeah, it's and then this is something I love about studios of the time period. When we talk today about like, oh, well, these studios are always just rushing to cash in and just make sequels of everything. Like, no, studios have always been like that. And like, Dr. X was a surprise hit. And so what does the studio do is they just reuse a bunch of the sets and they shoot a whole other movie with basically the same cast. And they even reuse the same theme music for the title credits. It's and they just tell a whole new movie. And that was like,
wow.
They've all studios have always been like, oh well, this worked. Let's just do this whole thing all over again.
Because it's still a corporation. They're still trying to make as much money as they can.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
and the thing was they made another class. Dr. X is great, and then they made another one called The Mystery of the Wax Museum the next year, and that one is an amazing film too. So they're a great double feature. They really are companion films.
Man.
Yeah, we
I'm
covered
gonna have to dig into
the remake of the Wax Museum one. I think the Vincent Price one.
Yes, yeah, that was a remake. It was remade again with Paris Hilton in more recent years. So like the 1933 is the original one.
Yeah,
and both were recently restored and put out on the Warner Archive Blu-ray. So they're really fantastic presentations.
we're both really big fans of the Vincent Price one, so I think we'll check out the Mystery of the Wax Museum too.
Oh yeah, and then if you watch those ones, the actors involved have just such sordid histories too. I mean, they both feature Fay Ray before she did King Kong, so this
Okay.
was kind of her early like when her first scream queen roles. But then like Dr. X, you have a Lionel Atwill who stars in it,
Oh,
who
okay. Yeah.
later like got in hot water in the press because of stories coming out about him supposedly having orgies at his house.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have another actor in the film named Lee Tracy, who like a year after that basically like destroyed his career because he was filming a movie in Mexico and he stood out on his balcony during a military parade and proceeded to relieve himself on the parade goers walking by, caused an international incident.
Wow.
So yeah, you watch the movie. So the movie just has so many things going on with it. You can just go down the rabbit hole of like all the sordid careers these people had, and it's like it has this kind of feel of like it's a major studio film, but it feels like a John Waters picture
That is
almost. Like it's
hilarious.
very transgressive.
Yeah.
Like a lot of those films are. You definitely get the impression, like in the 30s, that yeah, there was somebody not like really paying close attention. Like supposedly when Gabriel over the White House was completed and they showed it to the studio head at MGM, he was appalled. Like what is this? I guess he still released. Obviously, they still released it, but apparently he did not know how the heck that had gotten made on his watch.
Meanwhile, he was texting his best bro saying, "What did I just watch?"
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
That is, yeah, man. Well, thank you so much, Brian. We don't want to take more of your time, but we certainly appreciate you coming on the podcast with us and talking about these movies. I think
Yeah,
you
thank
definitely
you.
gave us a lot of thought and a lot of ways to kind of reapproach not only Magnificent Ambersons and the technology that's being used on it, but also kind of bringing a new film into our lexicon. That I think Jameson and I are both very pleased to have now. So,
Yeah, everything was very fun surprise to watch, and thank you so much for the conversation and coming on. Yeah.
Well, thank you
well,
very much for having me. This was a really great time.
is there anything you want to plug? Got anything
Oh,
else on the cooking?
not that
Not that
yeah,
you
well,
can talk about.
there's always new projects in the works. I suppose I can, if people want to follow more of the updates on the Ambersons project, they can follow my Instagram. It's just at Brian Robert Rose.
Awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Well, on this show, we like to cold close instead of cold open. So we just say bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye bye.